So what is it that war does that gets rid of capital? Well, of course, for some it's just physical destruction. For Europeans, it was the end of their huge foreign empires, which was producing for Britain and France and something like 15% of their wealth. They're gone. It produces a suspicion of stocks and bonds, which collapse on you and disappear. And so it goes, the market price of stocks in the West, the market price is what you and I are willing to pay for it, doesn't get back to the book price. That is what the economists would say that the company is really worth. It doesn't get back to the book price until about the 1890s. The 1980s. There's 50 years there where people say, I don't know. It happened before. Well, now, of course, the stock market's going crazy. What else? You get nationalization of industries. Renault, the Renault company, has collaborated with the Nazis. Well, they're taking over for sure. I mean, that's a destruction of private capital. All sorts of stuff happens. So that Europe and the United States sort of start again. So this is supposed to be a positive. There's solutions. Well, that's not a solution. Communism is not a solution. How about another one that's another negative, and we'll probably get to a positive one, and some of you will groan. But another possibility is, how about inflation? That gets rid of capital. So go ahead with the next graphic. Here's inflation rates in France and Germany from 1870, from 1913 to 1950. This is every year now, inflation of about 16% in, what are we looking at, France. In Germany, more like 13% every year for a long period of time. How does that get rid of capital? Well, you've got $1 million home. The next year you get the same $1 million home. What's the problem? Well, what's the $1 million worth? It's worth 17, 18% less than it was the year before because of this inflation. Or if you have bought government bonds to bail the government out to pay for war, and you think you're going to get 5% interest, you are going to get 5% interest. But you're going to get 5% interest for money that's lost 16% of its value. I mean, you're getting less money back from those war bonds than you paid. You didn't make any profit, you lost. I mean, that'll destroy capital pretty quickly. He says, that a solution? No, it's a terrible solution. Don't do that either. What's the only sensible solution that's left? Well, of course, we may well get some groans here, but go ahead, John. Taxation. Here's a graph of taxation in Western societies from 1870 to the present. 10%, 10%, 10%, 1910, World War I, and look at what the tax rates do. Regardless of whether it's Sweden, France, the UK, US, we could put 20 other countries up here, and it would be similar. They rise. Well, of course they rise. You got to pay for World War I. Then you got World War II depression issues you've got to do. You got to pay for World War II. But then World War II is over. Why do they continue to rise? Because the people that fought that war say, doggone it, we died, my uncle died, and we're not going to go back to that. We want social services. And depending on the society, you got certain different social services. It is important to note that starting in 1980, the tax rates have leveled off, even dropped a little bit. They're different. United States total tax rates about 31%. We had a challenge of this in our discussion group, and we've looked up this and that and so forth. I mean, even the American Enterprise Institute will say, yeah, it's about 28%. Sweden, more about 50%. I mean, there's differences among Western societies, but they're all high. Okay. Look what happens to the top income tax rates during the World War II period. Incredibly high. Of course, they've gone back down. Go ahead, next slide. The inheritance tax rates jump way up in some countries. They've gone back down too. So next slide, I think we got R versus G. Okay, we got to pause on this. This is famous. If you know anything about Piketty, it's R is greater than G. R, it's not an equality. It's R is greater. What's R again? What's R again? It's the rate of return on capital. What's G? Economic growth. And his argument is, look, if you have R greater than G for a long period of time, a generation, several generations, R, the people that own capital, just move ahead of the people that only get wealth from wage. Inequality simply grows. It's inevitable. What he does say is the R is greater than G is not an economic fact. Well, it is an economic fact, but it's not an economic law. It can be changed. It is not locked into place and we just have to suck it up. So look carefully at these next two graphs. Here's a graph of R over 2,000 years, G over 2,000 years. Forget this stuff. Just focus on the World War I to II period. R versus G, pretty far apart. Those that own capital are going to pull away. Gets a little closer. 1950 to 2012, growth almost catches the rate of return on capital. It's this period of incredible economic growth. Almost fulfills what Kuznets said. Almost gets to a stage where growth is so good that you get almost equal distribution of wages for a little while. That will continue for a little while, but with slowing economic growth and R staying about 5%, inequality sort of ratchets it up and says, oh, well, it's hopeless, right? Look carefully, you sort of lock in those lines, especially the top line, which is DAR, and we'll do the next slide. What happens to R? That graph is after taxation. That graph is after taxation. G stays exactly the same. I mean, that's locked in because of technology, population growth, and so forth. But if you calculate in what you actually, the owner of capital actually gets as a return on capital after taxes, Kuznets is right. There is balanced economic growth, but not because of pure market forces, but because governments have interfered and produced taxation. And of course you get the American dream here. And you get the 30 glorious years in France, in which France catches up. And you get Germany, which becomes a democratic society, not a nutty society. And you get a lot of good stuff that happens in here. But look what happens in the second half of the 21st century. And frankly, Piketty says, I'm assuming, for example, capital tax rates go to 0. They're almost there already, as nations compete with one another for lowering their tax base so that the businesses will move there. He says, you know, by 2050 there probably will be no capital income, no tax on capital whatsoever. I mean, that's what Paul Ryan says, and so forth and so forth. It's a popular idea. We got to compete with these lower. Well, yeah, you can compete, but inequality just balloons. Okay, so at the very moment when a thoughtful world doing serious analysis of what's going on here with slowing economic growth might consider more taxes to deal with this lower economic growth, to avoid inequality, the exact opposite is happening, of course, and it's happening globally. So next graph. Here is the capital income ratio in 8 rich countries from 1970 to the present. You know, pretty darn low by 1970, and all in various different ways creeping up. Maybe 300% on average, closing in on 600% on average, maybe 500% on average. The capital income rate is growing. As capital income rate grows, inequality grows, and so forth. Next graphic, John. Piketty spends about 3 chapters on the U.S. and our wage structure. He's sort of befuddled by it. So this graph is a graph of the inequality of wages. It is a line of the percent of total income that the top 10% gets in societies. And so you have the top 10% getting, just before World War I, in both Europe and the United States, between 45 and 40%. The US becomes more unequal during the war, but from 1920 to 1970, Europe and the United States income, they sort of track pretty much the same. There's not a great deal of divergence. They both go down about the same amount. But starting about 1970, there's this enormous divergence. And he says the world has never seen this before in any country ever, where not the wealth that's coming, not the ownership of capital. The world has seen ownership of capital being very unequal for a long time. But where income, mostly from wage, is so unequal. He says it's a world record in the United States right now. The world has never seen anything this unequal in terms of wage income, where we have these superstar wages that are, and it's not mostly entertainers and sports figures, it's mostly CEOs. And John cleverly just found something today. He added a couple slides here, so go ahead. I mean, this is news as of 2 days ago. The combined wealth of those in the Forbes 500, Forbes 400 list, their income went up 13% last year. Not likely many people in this room went up 13%. It may well have gone down. And who are some of those people? Well, I don't know if you'll recognize. We're not going to spend much time on this, but you know some of these people. You know, there's a. Well, who are these? Gates, Buffett, Larry Ellison. These two guys? Koch brothers. Walton, Bloomberg, and if we go to 9, 10, it's Walton. The Walton family has 4 in the top 10. The Koch brothers have 2 in the top, well, whatever. I mean, they're doing great. They're doing great. There are consequences for this enormous income inequality. This is a graph of income inequality on the horizontal axis. So the further out you are, the more unequal your income is. We are top of the list on that. This y-axis is a measure of social mobility. If you're low, if down here, you're in a society where the chances of you not ending up in the same place, the same income level as your parents, the chances of that are pretty high. The higher you creep up the y-axis, the more you are likely to be locked into the same income level. Now, if you're parents of Lafayette kids, you say, that's great. Yeah, I want to be locked into my mom's and dad's income level. But if you're somewhere else, well, you know, we're kind of the world leader on income inequality. Not quite so on being locked into place. Italy and the UK are worse, but not much worse. I mean, we are not the land of opportunity now in terms of social mobility. We may once have been in the 40s and 50s and 60s, but not now. So next. And as capital income ratios grow and inequality grows, inherited wealth comes back as a major factor and locks the social structure into place. This is France, not the United States. And this is the only graph he's got, because it's only France that's got records where he can do a graph. Like he said, I'm not sure what's going on with inheritance in the United States. He says, I cannot get the records. And there seems to be a great deal of lying going on from generation to generation about what people are giving to one another and so forth. So he's got France alone. Here's, just before World War I starts, 90% of all the capital that France has is inherited. Only 10% is accumulated in a lifetime of work. It drops way low in 1970, almost to 40%, where only 40% is inherited. The other 60% is earned in a lifetime. But here it goes again. It's rising quickly. These two different lines reflect two different projections of whether the growth slows that much or not. All right. You're doing great, because I can't do the clicker. Where are we going there? Yeah. I mean, you almost gag when you look at numbers like this. And Piketty is very honest. He says, we don't have great data on this.